It's been 1 year since I started the wake up process. And last December, end of December, I started looking into why I was angry all the time. And I was out of the organization for 10 years. It was 2012 when I left, walked out, had enough. And I just started over. I lost everything, lost my family. I was alone, and just like many of you out there that had to walk away, it's tough. But I just couldn't do it any longer. I had a heart attack in the organization, and just the stress. It's just and if you're the type of person where you wear your heart on your shoulder, it's going to rip your heart apart. And that's what happened to me. I care about a lot of people, and when I was out in the ministry, especially up north in these villages, I grew fond of the people, and I grew to know them, and I couldn't bear the reproach and the slander that was put upon these people by the elders, just to make me wrong, just because they wanted to be right. It was really about jealousy in the congregations, and these congregations are all about politics and jealousy. And the congregation I was in, and I didn't know how to talk about it. I was just all bottled up, and I was angry a year ago. But the elders, some of the elders, the presiding overseer in this case, was a pioneer. And here I am, just nothing, a nobody, who has a bit of indigenous background. And I decided to go up north and tackle some unassigned territory. And lo and behold, I end up with contracts up there, and this turns into a 15-year project going up, and 7 years outside of the truth, 7 years in, trying to pioneer in all these territories unassigned. And there's enough money in the contracts where I'm bringing tons of people up. Every year I'm bringing people up. I even flew the guy that signs out unassigned territory in the Bethel, the Canadian Bethel. I flew him and his wife out the last time, and so they could experience it, and so they could see what was happening up in these territories. And it was after that I walked out, and it was an interesting journey. The couple from Bethel were very nice. In fact, he couldn't understand why these elders were acting the way they were. And I had to fly them up on their holidays. This was not a Bethel experience. It was all outside of the Bethel arrangement. But this brother wanted to know, that was signing out these territories. He'd never been in unassigned territories. And then was interesting because we flew him out. Him and his wife did wonderful. They were young people, 20s perhaps. They sent me up a picture book later. But then I tried to communicate with them, never could. It's like they got transferred. Bethel transferred them to another department, and they disappeared. They actually sent me up this book. It was a picture book, and no words, but they took pictures of all the territories, and it was quite an adventure at that point. But that was 2012, 2011, and then I left because of the politics, basically, in the congregation. During the time I was in the organization for 30 years, I was disfellowshipped once, a year after I got in. And after that, I got married. And throughout the duration of 30 years, someone in our family was disfellowshipped every 5 years and trying to get reinstated. It's just BS, this disfellowshipping and how they do it. It's not based upon the Bible. So the Bible has Paul laid out some criteria for disfellowshipping, but they take it another step. They don't consider Jesus' love, and there's a balancing effect. And for most cases, if disfellowshipping is necessary, then a restraining order is necessary. If you have a person that's that that much of a reviler, usually you need a restraining order, and then I could see something like that being warranted, but it would be done by the public system. It would be done by a public judiciary system that's done properly. And I have went through that process, and I understand the whole process. So I had to carry out a restraining order on someone in my own family, not Jehovah's Witness, but someone that was giving me a lot of problems. And so I understand the process, and it's a long process, and you have to give a lot of proof. So, but the Jehovah's Witness organization, they disfellowship on a whim, and it's ridiculous. So that's why I just walked out, and I gave them no reasons, just walked out, just quit. I sold my house actually and moved, and that was it. And that's when everything divided. So my family went one way, I went another way, and everyone just kind of divided. And this is what's happening in this Jehovah's Witness religion, is it's causing so many divisions. So many households are getting broken up because of the elder bodies. And the elder bodies are only following the governing body. The real criminals in this organization are 8 men who reside in New York. Those are the criminals. And those are the ones that, at this point in my life, I will continue to work on breaking down the foundation of this destructive religion, because it's a destructive sect. It's a very destructive cult, and it's designed to break families apart. You look at this situation down in the States where there's a shooting. I guarantee you, and I don't know the details, it's something to do with disfellowshipping, and it's something to do with breaking up of the families that this organization does. And that's got to stop. And the only way to stop it is to break down the whole religion. And if there could be a lawsuit for disfellowshipping, the organization would crumble in one night. And this may come. So what happened to me? A year ago, I was out of the organization for 12 years, or for 10 years, from 2012 to a year ago. And I still had this Rutherford trance going around in my head all the time. You'd think, when's the end coming? Are we in the tribulation? We're all thinking, like me at least, I was thinking like a JW, even though I walked out. And I didn't look at a Bible. I was done with it. I was just done with religion, and I didn't want to go back to any other religion. It's just the way it is. I think for a lot of us ex-JWs, we're just kind of in between this two spaces. We're in between two worlds. So that's why a lot of us get lost, get depressed, lots of suicides. I can understand all of these things, and I can understand why people go atheist, because you've had enough. So I didn't want to be an atheist. I always believed in God. And I actually liked the ministry. I'm kind of ashamed to say that, but I like dealing with people. But the organization isn't set up for that. It's all politics. I remember the district overseer comes in and says, we need an experience of the Northern Territories, these unassigned territories. So my family was selected, and it was not a district assembly, it was a circuit assembly. And that's a big thing. If you get an assembly part, never had one. We're disfellowship, too many disfellowshippings in the family over the years. And, it takes years. Then it's 5 years. Every 5 years, there's something going wrong. And it takes years for family members to get back in. So I can't have privileges as long as I have a family member. And I always put my family first. It doesn't matter. I couldn't care about privileges. I'd put my hand up to comment. No one I would never get called upon. But I just keep doing it because I had something to say. But only certain elders would ever call on me to comment. And that's how it got to be. They humiliated me in the end. I was a pioneer, and they stripped me of that. Then they took my privileges away, just so the whole congregation knew I was unruly. And what did I do? I argued with a few elders about the North work. And then they got up on the platform. And then they said, all the indigenous people in the Arctic, or they went up there to the Northwest Territories. And they didn't even work the fly-in territories. They drove up because they're too cheap to spend $3,000 and $365 a night to go into these fly-in territories, because that's what it cost. So unless you have some kind of a work contract, those territories are unassigned because it's so expensive. So they go up, drive up, and work some fringe territories, indigenous territories, come back, get up in the platform, and tell everyone they're alcoholics and drunks. It's not worth your time. So they told the congregation. Because when I went up with a few, we ended up with 500 Bible studies. So many Bible studies that they announced it at the district assembly to help us. And yeah, the elders in this congregation were jealous, just so rotten jealous. So I talked to the presiding overseer, and I said, "What's your problem? Why are you persecuting?" And I use those words, "Why are you persecuting me and my family?" And he looked at me and he says, "Because you didn't invite me over for dinner." And I said, "What?" He says, "I invited you over when you moved in, and you didn't invite us over." I said, "Are you serious? You persecuted my family all these years because of that?" He had nothing to say. I couldn't believe it. And it was at that point I knew I had to get out of that religion, because this is how it works in that religion. So I was talking about my family. We practiced this assembly part for weeks. And, it had been 5 years or so since there was a disfellowshipping. I was regular pioneering, and we qualified. And I was working these territories that the district overseer wanted this as part of the assembly part. So what happened? They come up to me last minute and say, "Your family's not qualified. Your daughter or your son was doing something, and yeah, we're going to use this exemplary family in the congregation." So here the brother that went up with the presiding overseer, he was an elder, to come back and say the Indians are all drunks and alcoholics, and they announced that. Well, that was the brother's family that they used, because he's exemplary, his kids are exemplary, right? And they did go up to a fringe territory and hide in their hotels because they're all drunks and alcoholics. That's what they said about the people up there. But yeah, we went up and had 500 Bible studies. So I don't know what the problem was. You see, the problem is when you go up with that, when you go out in the ministry, or when you go out in life with a mindset that everyone else out there is evil, drunks and alcoholics, and they're not worth our time. When you have that mindset, you're not going to attract people. It's the law of attraction. Whatever we put out comes back. And if we put out loving energy because we care for people, people are going to sign up. They want a Bible study. They want to study with you. And of course, we couldn't do them all. So I gave a lot of them away. And they all fizzle out because it's not you. Because you're the one that has that energy that says, "I love you and I want to help you." And the other ones just want to put in time and count a Bible study. And to be able to say, "I got this study up in the Arctic." And they all fizzle out. They all fizzle out. And I became disheartened because there's something wrong in this organization, and it's politics, it's greed. Like this is locally within the elders. It's very political. And there's a lot of greed and a lot of who's the best, who's the most righteous. So they used this brother's family on the assembly part. The kids hadn't went up north, and here they're faking. They're using our part. I wrote the part for them. They used it. And I had to sit there in that audience and watch them give that part. And it just didn't sit right. And I went home and I told my ex-wife now, I said that I've had enough. I can't do this no more. And I guess I threw a little bit of a tantrum and threw a couple boxes around and sweared in the garage. And she phoned the elders. And that's when I lost all my privileges, because I was a reviler. And that's what happened. So that's the real story. And that's a year later. Couldn't really talk about it, but it's not that bad of a story. A lot of people have went through a lot of worse stuff. So I'm sitting there all these years with all this anger, and you wonder how you're going to deal with it. Well, last year, my wife, I got remarried. My wife says, she's a good wife, and I never talked religion for 10 years. I was afraid to, didn't want to. And she says, honey, you got to get this stuff out. Why don't you write it down? And if you go to therapy, that's one of the first things a counselor will say, start writing things down. It's amazing once you start writing things down and getting your thoughts on paper, what can happen. So after about 3 months of writing, I had probably 170 pages of junk, stuff I could never publish, because it was just all stuff about people. And I hadn't really come out of this Rutherford trance yet. You see, at that point, I was just mad at people in the local area that, why did they demonize me? I leave, and then you don't have to get disfellowship in this organization, because then they just pass it around. Oh yeah, he's demonized. He's in with the Indians and he's demonized. You see, they demonize the indigenous people. And I think it's sad, just sad. But that's what happened. And I couldn't believe it when I left, that they would demonize me. Like, that's the worst, to be demonized. It was humiliating. And then once they demonize you and pass it around, people that used to talk to me a little bit, nothing. I'm done. So I'm sitting here in December, and I'm wondering, this is a year ago, and I'm wondering, I'm angry and depressed. And by the way, I had another heart attack after that, because the anger inside us rips away at our heart. For some of us, for me, I had a second heart attack, and this time it was a bad one. And so I recovered, and that was probably in 2018. So I recovered, and I'm sitting here still angry, and that's not good for the heart. So my wife realized that, and I started writing. And so 3 months in, I threw it all out, got mad. And I have a really good wife. She must be like a counselor or something. She says, honey, write a fairy tale. Put all those that stuff into other people, and just write a fairy tale, something that your friends would read. And so I did. It gave me a whole new direction. I started writing a fairy tale about my life, and it came out, and I finished the book in June, To Heaven and Back in One Night. And I wrote a story about, it turned into a novel. It's amazing when you start throwing characters in and changing the story around, it gets bigger. And the story kept growing and growing and growing, and it's a fabulous story. So it starts out that Mr. Doe, the character, had to get out of spiritual darkness, and he prayed and prayed, and I'm going to be reading this, so this is nothing new. I'm doing a open Bible read, or an Bible book reading, January 3rd, and I invite you guys all to click on, and I'll be reading the first 5 chapters of this book. So as I was writing this book, I started to wake up, and I was writing things in it. My wife would say, well, because we hadn't talked about religion for 10 years. And so she wanted me to write. So I thought, well, I'm just going to start writing. And I had all these JW things coming up. And she said, well, what's paradise on earth? So I'd have to research it, and I realized I couldn't prove it. Well, what's 144,000 going to heaven? And I'd research it, and I couldn't prove it. And she said, well, what about God's name, Jehovah? I never used that. And I researched it, and I found out, holy crap, that was invented by Catholic monks in the Reformation. Jesus never even used Jehovah, never knew it. And they said it was the original word, name. And it's not, it's Yahweh, Yeshua for Jesus. We weren't taught the truth. We were taught Russell and Rutherford's program. And the deeper I got into it, I realized my eyes started to open. I started to wake up, and I still didn't believe I was in a cult. I really finished this book, and at the end, I realized it's a cult. It's a cult. And then I didn't want to verbalize that. It took me 2 months after writing this book to verbalize that I was in a cult, to admit that I'm a cult survivor. We don't want to admit it. I didn't want to admit it. So, but this book helped me to wake up. And how did it do it? I was so angry at the founders, Russell and Rutherford, for putting us all under this trance. It's a big trance. And what I realized that we're all under a trance. Even when you leave this religion, this stuff is still in your head. And I had to undo it. And then we're afraid to go online and look at any apostate stuff because they've made the apostates to be the evilest people on earth, the evilest. And I didn't even want to look online. It wasn't until after I wrote this book I actually started watching a few of the apostate programs and realizing, holy cow, they found the same stuff I did. And the easiest one is the truth. They usurped Jesus' truth. That was one of the easiest ones, but it goes deeper. And then I found out Rutherford was an alcoholic, and these guys all had women problems. So how do you deal with all that? How do you reconcile all of this in your mind? So as we start to unwind things and figure out the foundation of this religion, I liked the New World Translation at the time, and I liked the Bible. But then afterwards, I got to realize the Bible's fake. There's so many changes in their Bible. And then it took me months after writing this book, and I started the channel because I wanted to tell my kids mainly about this, in case I'm not around. I wanted to let them know that I had them in a cult because I raised my kids in this cult for 30 years. Wow, my kids left home. My son, he's now out. But this trance, it doesn't get out of our head. And it takes time. So as I wrote this book and got through it, it helped me to get through it. And I put a story in. The character, Mr. Doe, got to go to heaven, but he prayed. He went to heaven in one night and back, and he got to see a trial. And he got put on trial, but to get there, he wasn't conscious. When he got up to the pearly gates, he wasn't conscious. The angels wouldn't let him in. You see, we're not conscious when we leave that organization. And until we become conscious, the angel said, you got to pray, you got to get conscious. So there was a back door to get there. It's quite a journey. I'm going to be reading that part. But it's a fun book. I put a little bit of poetry in it, and it's really written for the XJW community. And I look at it now, and I laugh as I read it. There's a lot of laughs in it. I put some poetry in it. You'll see that when I do the reading. But it's been quite the journey. 6 months. I wrote this book, sent it out for my wife. She did all the work on doing the grammar and a lot of the editing. And then we had an outside guy that just showed up and helped out. And he was a kind of a column in a newspaper. He took editorial training. So he went through it. He liked the book. He had no religious background, and he loved the book. So having him back in one night. So June, I started the channel, Fixing My Faith. And since then, I've been uncovering a lot of stuff. But here's what I have to say. Once we start to get this Rutherford trance away and we break it down, and there's a lot of work, there's a lot of different things, there's a lot of indoctrination that many of us have received through that organization, and we believed it. So once we program that into our mind, we have to unprogram ourselves, and it takes a bit of work. But once we get out of that, the anger dissipates. And I found that on this channel, I can put a lot of my energy, that if anything's bothering me, I can put it into constructive work and find out, why is that bothering me? What kind of indoctrination did they do that's bothering me now? And that's where I'm at now, is little things come up, and then I realized, hey, I can put a show out on that and talk about this part of the indoctrination. And we had a really good series. We called them Run Like Hell. We did seven movies, Run Like Hell, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they're all various aspects. And this is really hardcore, admitting that you were in a cult and this organization is destructive. And the Bible warns us about these destructive sects. And so we reveal that, and it's a complete turn on them because it really exposes who they are. So I encourage you, if you're watching this for the first time and you're waking up, check some of our videos out online, and don't be afraid of the online XJW community, because that is a lot of good people out there helping you to wake up and go through this process. It's not an easy process. This book will help you to wake up. It's a fictional story based on real events. It's fun. It's like getting into a movie, and you're an XJW. You're going to know all the characters, and it's a lot of fun. So that's what I have to say. There's my wake up process, folks. It's a long haul. It took a year, and hopefully there's a trail here that will help a few people out there to wake up and to have a smooth sailing without heart attacks. We don't need to have heart attacks. So the sooner we can get rid of the anger and the hate, the sooner we can fill that gap with love. Because the organization that we were in, it is full of judgment and hate. It's subtle. The organization is full of judgment and hate, just full of it. And that will get into us, and we have to get that out. Well, that's all I have to say. We'll see you January 3rd, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And there's a live chat afterwards, so I'll get to know you a little better. And that'll be great. So until next time, keep living your life with love. Bye for now.